When Elias Ward pulled hard on the leather straps, his horse came to an abrupt halt. There, sprawled across the scorched earth, lay an unconscious Apache woman. Her powerful build was caked with grime and congealed blood. Dark bruises from brutal lashing covered her back and arms, while rawhide still encircled her wrists, evidence of recent captivity. Each breath came in weak, irregular gasps. Without hesitation, Elias dismounted and knelt in the burning sand. Waves of heat shimmered upward from the baked ground. Yet what chilled him most was a single thought racing through his mind. This might be an ambush. The Apache had made it clear before stay out of their business. His fingers found her throat, checking for life. Her heartbeat was barely detectable, like a whisper threatening to disappear forever. Leaving her here meant certain death under the merciless sun. Through clenched teeth, Elias pulled out his blade and cut away her bonds. Then he lifted her dead weight onto his shoulder. She felt like hauling a heavy feed sack, but he pushed through and slung her across his mount's back. "Hell!" he growled, spurring his horse forward. Red earth exploded behind them as they rode, the air thick with the metallic smell of blood mixed with desert heat. Elias never glanced backward. Anyone watching would understand exactly where his loyalty now lay, and this decision would change everything forever. Racing through the splintered wooden gate, Elias rushed the unconscious woman into his dwelling. He carefully placed her on a worn blanket near the stone hearth, then quickly built a fire. Golden flames cast dancing shadows across his weathered, perspiration-streaked features. He retrieved the water pail and poured what little remained from his dwindling supply. In this parched season, every drop was precious as silver. Still, Elias dampened a rag and cleaned the dirt and dried blood from her features. Her pulse remained thread-like, but at least it was there. Elias had always avoided other people's troubles. Years ago, sickness had swept through these parts, claiming his beloved wife and 2 small boys. Ever since, he'd existed like a specter, caring only for his withered land and meager cattle herd. He avoided the settlement and steered even clearer of the complications that came with human contact. But tonight's actions had shattered that isolation completely. The woman lying before him was different from other Apache women he'd encountered. Her frame was imposing, muscled arms and wide shoulders that spoke of a fighter's life. The lash marks across her flesh suggested severe punishment, probably for violating tribal customs. Elias understood one truth absolutely. If her people discovered his interference, they'd mark him as their adversary. Darkness was settling rapidly outside. Desert winds pushed sand through gaps in the cabin walls, carrying the day's lingering heat. Elias fed more timber to the flames and settled beside the woman. The firelight revealed his face, lined sun-baked, with steel-gray eyes that were distant yet penetrating. He offered her the final drops of water in a small cup. Her lips parted slightly as she sipped, then consciousness left her again. Elias exhaled deeply and drew his rifle close, keeping it within easy reach. He pressed his back against the timber wall, watching the entrance. He knew exactly what kind of people would abandon a woman to die in the wasteland, and they might come back to complete their work. Tonight, if they appeared, Elias Ward would be waiting in that doorway. The hearth fire had dimmed to glowing coals. Elias nodded in his chair, rifle balanced on his knees. A soft noise jerked him alert. The woman, she was struggling upright, her dark eyes wide with terror. Instantly, her powerful hand seized the blade beside the cook stove. Metal gleamed in the ember light. Elias remained motionless. He lifted both palms slowly, his voice quiet and gravelly. "If you plan to cut me, make it quick. But if survival matters to you, drop that weapon." She was gasping, moisture beading her brow. Her gaze swept the cabin's mall, aged but not a cell. Then she studied the man before her, tall, wiry, unshaven, with eyes that were steady and hard. She wavered. Elias maintained his calm tone. "I freed you from those bindings. If departure is your choice, that exit stands open. But beyond it lies nothing except burning sand and carrion birds." The blade shook in her grasp. After endless seconds, she released her breath and let it clatter to the floor. Her strong body folded like a toppled oak. Elias moved forward, retrieved the weapon, and offered her the remaining water bowl. Drink this. Your need exceeds mine." She accepted the vessel, sipping carefully while never taking her eyes off Elias, as though trying to determine if this was some elaborate snare. Without another word, Elias walked onto the porch and sat on the step's edge, rifle across his thighs. Through the doorway, she watched his moonlit silhouette remain statue still. Only the thin smoke curls from his tobacco showed any movement. Throughout that entire night, she couldn't sleep. Whenever nightmares surfaced, she'd open her eyes to find Elias still positioned there, entering, never departing either. A strange sensation began growing in her chest, something she'd believed had perished with her former life. The feeling of being protected. When dawn's first light appeared, Elias hadn't shifted. He simply turned his head and spoke quietly. "If recovery here suits you, stay. If leaving calls to you, I won't prevent it. The decision rests with you." She stared at him, then looked away. No words came, but her fingers tightened around the blanket covering her shoulders. That gesture was her response. Sunrise painted the cabin's weathered roof with golden light. Now she could stand independently. She ventured into the yard, her shoulders still roughly wrapped, but her expression sharp and alert. Elias was mending a damaged fence section, not bothering to look up. "You're recovering," he noted evenly. "Food's available if you want it. There's a water source behind the livestock enclosure." She said nothing initially, but soon picked up a wooden pail and headed for the water tank. Her thick, powerful arms moved beneath sun-darkened skin as she hauled up the bucket. Elias glanced over at someone who'd nearly died just hours before was already capable of labor. It surprised him. That day, she spoke almost nothing. Simply shadowed Elias silently, observing how he patched fencing and mixed clay for wall repairs. As evening approached and Elias finally stopped to rest, she suddenly stepped forward, grabbed the hammer, and completed driving the remaining stakes. Elias paused momentarily, then nodded quietly and allowed her to continue. That evening marked the first time she started the cooking fire unbidden. She prepared a basic rabbit broth and placed it before Elias wordlessly. He examined the bowl, then her. A silent nod was his only acknowledgement. In the following days, the cabin's silence was broken. Sounds of hammering, digging, and wood striking would fill the air. Elias excavated a fresh water hole. She hauled rocks to create windbreaks. Her strength was remarkable. She reconstructed an entire fence section in a single afternoon. One evening, as daylight faded, both sat on the front porch. Elias lit his tobacco while she carved with a small knife. For the first time she spoke. "What made you rescue me?" Elias gazed across the parched, cracked fields. "Because abandoning someone out there was unbearable. I've witnessed enough death." She fell silent. After a pause, she nodded. A simple explanation, yet something inside her seemed to relax and unknot. That night, as wind rustled the old roofing, she no longer thrashed restlessly. For the first time in months, deep sleep claimed her. Meanwhile, outside the cabin, Ilias's measured footsteps circled the homestead. Thank you for joining me. If this tale brought back memories of dusty horizons and the thunder of hoofbeats echoing in your soul, please subscribe to my channel so we can gather again each day. And I'll share another story from the frontier. That afternoon, the sky suddenly turned harsh gold. Elias was adjusting his old horse's reins when distant hoofbeats reached his ears. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a growing dust cloud approached. "Unwelcome visitors," Elias muttered. Snatching the Winchester from the porch, she heard the sound and emerged. The moment she spotted the riders, she froze. 3 Apache warriors on horseback blocked the ranch entrance. War paint decorated their faces, their eyes cold as winter stone. The leader urged his mount forward and spoke in deep, monotone words. "Our woman is here. Surrender her." She stepped backward, her hand instinctively finding the small blade at her hip. Elias moved forward, positioning himself between the cabin door and the riders, rifle steady in his grip. "She's wounded. She has the right to remain here until healed." Another warrior snarled, his voice rising. "She has been banished by the tribe. She has no right to exist on this land. If you protect her, you become our enemy." Elias didn't lower his weapon. His gray eyes were like cold steel. "If killing is your intention, you'll have to go through me first." The silence that followed was tight as a drawn bowstring. Wind stirred red dust around the horse's hooves. From behind Elias, she stared at him, his expression calm, but his shoulders tense, ready to fire at the first threatening gesture. Finally, the lead warrior lowered his spear, his gaze blazing with rage. "We will return. Next time, we won't come alone." Silence in the yard. She gripped her knife until her knuckles went white. Elias turned back toward her, fire still flickering in his eyes. "They'll return with reinforcements," he said quietly. If staying is, they yanked their reins and thundered away, leaving behind a dust trail and heavy, choking "Still your wish? We must prepare." She nodded. Her eyes now burned with a different flame, not fear, but the fierce desire to survive. That night, Elias lit the lantern and dragged out every ammunition round, an old sandbag from storage. She stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, helping barricade windows and build yard defenses. For the first time since arriving, she was no longer merely a fugitive. She had chosen to stand with him for the coming battle. 3 days later, before sunset completed, red dust began rising on the horizon. Elias stood on the porch, Winchester ready. She had bound her hair back, gripping spear and knife. Her posture was that of a warrior prepared for combat. The hoofbeats grew thunderous until nearly 20 Apache riders swept in, circling the ranch completely. The air thickened with horse sweat and tanned leather scents. The warriors stayed silent except for their mounts' heavy snorting. An elder advanced. He was aged with flowing silver hair and a deerskin cloak across his shoulders. His face was stone hard. He looked at Elias, then at her, standing proudly behind him. She was banished. "She belongs to dust. Why do you shelter her?" Elias kept his rifle raised. "Because she lives still, and she has the right to choose." Murmurs rippled through the circle. A young warrior shouted, "She shamed the tribe. She cannot be permitted to live." She stepped forward, her voice booming. "I brought no shame to anyone. I was punished for not bearing children, but that's no crime." Silence spread like ripples. The warriors exchanged glances, though fire still burned in their eyes. The elder turned his gaze to her. "You choose to exist here beneath a white man's roof. That means severing all tribal connections." She gripped her spear shaft and nodded. "I choose life here." The elder remained quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. "We depart tonight, but at dawn I return with the elder council. If you remain by then, you will no longer be a tribal daughter. And you," he turned to Elias, "you will face the consequences." He wheeled his horse, and the entire war party followed, their hooves thundering as red dust swirled over the fence line. Once they vanished from view, Elias lowered his rifle. She still stood tall, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Elias looked at her, his voice low. "By morning, everything changes. Are you certain?" She met his eyes, her gaze burning with determination. "I already died once out there. I won't die again." Elias nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. The night ahead would be endless, and when the sun rose, this ranch might become a war zone. At the following dawn, the sky turned deep, burnished bronze. Elias had awakened long before the rooster's call. He stood on the porch, rifle fully loaded. Inside, she was tightening her shoulder bandage, her eyes sharp and steel-cold. A horn sounded in the distance, low and thunderous like approaching storms. Then the riders appeared. Not a small group this time, but the complete elder council with their escort. At least 50 people surrounded the ranch in an unbroken circle. A pathway opened before the gate. The silver-haired elder rode forward. Behind him came 2 older women, their dark hair streaked with gray, members of the matriarchal council, those who held power over her fate. She stepped out, standing tall. Morning light caught the scars on her sun-darkened skin-whip marks, not yet fully healed. She no longer stood behind Elias. She stood beside him. Shoulder to shoulder, one elder woman spoke. "Takina, daughter of the tribe, Today we ask one final time. Do you choose to return and face judgment, or do you choose permanent exile? She drew a deep breath. The early wind swept through, whipping her hair into wild tangles. I will not return, she said clearly. I choose life. Life on my terms, not under unjust punishment. Murmurs rippled through the circle. Some warriors tightened their spear grips. Others lowered their heads as if silently accepting what they'd heard. The other elder woman gave a slow nod. From this day forward, your name is erased from the lineage. You are no longer a tribal daughter. You will not rest in ancestral earth, but also from this day on. The tribe will no longer pursue you. The old chief turned his gaze to Elias, his eyes blade sharp. You sheltered her. That means her fate now binds to yours. If she spills blood because of this choice, blood stains your hands too. Elias didn't look away. I understand. A moment passed, one that felt like eternity. Then the elder raised his hand. One by one, the warriors turned their horses and withdrew from the circle. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded did she finally exhale. Her broad shoulders trembled, but her eyes blazed with fire. Elias looked at her for a long time, then gave a slow nod. You just chose a new life, he said. She answered softly, her voice rough but proud. No, I chose myself. That afternoon, the sky turned pitch black without warning. After weeks of drought, the first raindrops fell on the dusty cabin roof. The scent of wet earth rose thick in the air, as if the entire prairie was releasing a long, weary sigh. Elias stood on the porch, rain soaking through his shirt. He watched the cracked fields slowly soften under the falling water. She stepped out behind him, her dark hair wild in the wind. Rain glistening on her muscular arms. The storm came quickly, Elias said, his voice rough. She said nothing. She stepped down from the porch, tilting her face skyward, eyes closed. Rain mixed with dust and dried blood on her skin. Washing away everything that remained of her past, Elias watched her for a long moment. She was no longer the abandoned woman he'd found in the desert. Standing before him now was a warrior and a free human being. As the rain began to ease, Elias stepped into the yard and stood beside her. The two remained in silence for a long time, listening to the steady rainfall. You can leave, Elias said slowly. They won't hunt you anymore. The road south still leads to town. She turned to him, her eyes calm but deep. And do you want me to leave? Elias was quiet. Rain rolled down his sun-darkened face. Finally, shook his head. No. I think this ranch is no longer big enough for just one person. A faint smile crossed her lips, the first genuine smile since the day he saved her. That whole afternoon. The two worked side by side, clearing the yard, turning soil, repairing fencing. She carried the heaviest logs. Elias drove the posts. By the time the sun broke through the clouds again, the ranch looked different, stronger, cleaner, and filled with the scent of fresh earth. When night came, Elias built a fire in the yard. They sat beside it, watching sparks drift into the dark sky. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel alone. She laid her spear on the ground, a silent promise. Elias lit a cigarette and smiled gently. Tomorrow, we build a new horse pen. She nodded. The firelight cast her face in warm, glow-strong, but peaceful. In the quiet of the night, the rain had stopped. All that remained was the smell of damp earth and the feeling that something new had begun. Sometimes we don't get to choose where we're born, but we can choose where we stand. And sometimes choosing to stand beside someone else means daring to stand against the world. In that very moment when two lost souls decide not to walk away, a true home is built not just from wood and nails, but from courage and trust. Thank you all for listening. I truly hope you stay happy and healthy. I love you all, my beloved audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the Wild West.